very important role. She will decide, I mean, she has the chance of deciding who is going to win in the runoff. It's hard to say. It's probably that her party will support Serra, but she will remain neutral. So it's hard to say what's going to happen. It depends on the campaign.
And who José Serra is?
José Serra is also an economist like Dilma Rousseff, who also was a militant in the anti-dictatorship movement. He actually was the president of the Students' Union in 1964 when the military took over, and he went to Chile in exile. He came back with the amnesty and became a deputy and a senator, and then a minister of health, as you said before in the program. And then he was the mayor of São Paulo and the governor of the state of São Paulo. He's the oldest candidate. He's a 67-year-old candidate. He was a minister of Fernando Henrique Cardoso, and he will have to, if he makes an alliance with Marina, he has a chance. If he doesn't, it's hard to say that he will have more than he had yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk, Esther Hamburger, about the role of the MST, of the landless movement in Brazil? I know they have a very uneasy alliance with Lula.
They have an uneasy alliance with Lula. As a social movement, they have uneasy alliances with political parties and governments. They always have their own agenda, but they have an important role in pushing Brazil to have a more democratic agrarian structure. Brazil, although we are now in a good economic situation, and although poverty has decreased in the last 20 years, we are still a very unequal country. And the main challenge for the next president is to move ahead and to change the structure of the country. And I think the reason why Marina has surprised with her 20% of votes is because she has she has a discourse of structural change.
Esther Hamburger, you have a very interesting system in Brazil. Voters have to vote. People between the age of 18 and 70, not voting could result in a small fine and make it impossible to get a passport or a government job, among other penalties. So when you talk about 135 million voters, unlike in the United States, people vote.
Yes, people vote, and they like to vote. People talk about elections a lot. The elections yesterday was the main subject, and today it's still the main subject, not only on television and radio and on the newspapers, but people talk about elections. It's mandatory to vote, but people also, the fine is real low, so it's not that a big deal. But people like to vote, and they know they have a chance to say something and to change something.
It's interesting. I'm wondering if you know this, Greg, in Latin America or in other places as well, where there's mandatory voting, if you end up getting more progressive candidates, if people who are more progressive tend not to vote.
Well, yes and no. I think a number of countries have mandatory voting. I think Peru does, and Alan Garcia won there. I don't think Venezuela does. I may be wrong about that. Bolivia does. I think what you see, the fine is very low in Brazil, so I think maybe there was 85% turnout. Chances are, I would say probably those 15% that didn't vote were probably from the poorer social base of the Workers' Party. So if they are mobilized during the next round, I imagine that they would, probably from the Northeast, they would probably vote for Dilma.
The critical issues in Brazil right now?
Well, what's remarkable is that Ceja and Dilma share a remarkable overlap of agendas. I think that that this speaks to the success of Lula, both for Brazil, leaving Brazil a much stronger country, but also leaving Latin America a much stronger country. I think, you know, not only were these two women of the left, the opposition candidate was not a man of the right. I mean, he was a social democrat in some ways. You mentioned in your introduction his contribution to challenging the international pharmaceutical regime, and in a lot of ways the Social Democratic Party government before Lula put into place a lot of increased social spending that Lula was able to capitalize on. Ceja agreed, and he actually tried to run in the shadow of Lula, you know, as the true heir of Lula, but that obviously didn't work to a large degree. What's interesting is that Ceja is actually more progressive on one issue, and that's finance, interest rates. Lula has actually kept interest rates fairly high. He lowered them a little bit during the recession as a way of kind of stimulus. But for the most part, he's been quite orthodox, keeping the bond markets and the international bankers happy. Ceja represents, I think, a certain kind of industrial sector within Brazil that wants lower interest rates. I think domestically, what he would do, he'd probably be more willing to also to try to impose some kind of neoliberal reform on labor law, which Dilma won't do. I think you know, part of the Workers' Party will not. They won't go for that kind of structural reform. It's in foreign policy that I think that you do see the biggest difference, and this comes back to something that just happened last week with an attempted coup in Ecuador. Lula, as I said, left not just Brazil stronger, but Latin America stronger. He's led a remarkable project of Latin American solidarity, or more specifically South American solidarity. And Dilma promises to carry on with that. Lula has protected Bolivia, Ecuador against Brazilian economic interests, where I think Ceja may be a little bit more willing to go after some of those smaller countries in Brazil's periphery than Dilma would. And
Lula's anti-poverty program, which has been so successful?
Well, again, a lot of that stuff started, not to take credit away from Lula, but he did expand it and he did institutionalize it in a remarkable way, and he did increase spending, but a lot of that spending was already increased in the previous government. And Lula has had 2 terms to basically take the credit for it, and he should take them.
Finally, I want to turn to Ecuador and what has been talked about as an attempted coup, and now police colonels are being brought up on attempted assassination. What is your assessment of what happened?
Well, it's still early to tell exactly what happened.
Thursday night.
Yeah, the government has made a lot of, I think, accurate accusations that it was not just a spontaneous social protest against austerity. It was too coordinated. It happened simultaneously in a number of cities, a number of barracks. Sectors of the Air Force joined in immediately. It seems like there have been sectors that have been dissatisfied with Correa within the military, and certainly a past president, Lucio Gutierrez, who claims to be a populist, but really is more of a kind of old-time Codillo. He's in exile in Brazil. He immediately came out and called Correa illegitimate and called for him to step down. There's been a lot of accusations that he has been behind a lot of the destabilization. It seems that Correa has managed to gain the upper hand, and he's stepped back a little bit, and he's rolling back the state of emergency, and it's a little early to see how it'll shake out. Correa has a much more contentious relationship with social movements than Chavez in Venezuela does, or Morales in Bolivia does, even though there have been some problems in Bolivia. Correa isn't organically linked in some ways the way Morales is in Bolivia to these indigenous social movements, environmental social movements. So that even before this, there's been a confrontation. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
Well, we will leave it there. Greg Grandin, thanks for being with us from New York University, author of Empire's Workshop, Latin America, the United States, and the Rise of the New Imperialism. His most recent book, Fordlandia, was finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in History. Thank you very much to Esther Hamburger, professor of School of Arts and Communications at the University of Sao Paulo, also a journalist. Thanks for joining us from Brazil. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, massive protest in Washington, D.C. We'll hear from, among others, Harry Belafonte. Stay with us.